Well, good evening and welcome to the Carnegie Historical Museum as we celebrate the heritage farms. My name's Dave Neff. I'm on the board of directors of the museum, and this is the 7th month that we are highlighting heritage farms, 150 years plus in one family. 150 years isn't enough, so tonight we're celebrating 176 years of the Billingsley family being in the territory here. Round Prairie Township. The homestead was founded in 1846. Great arrived in 44, and the deed took place in 1846. So we just feel so fortunate. It grew from 120 acres to 390 acres. And Jim and Mike Billingsley are the brothers that are working with that farm at this time. We thank you for watching. We thank the family for being here. We have wives, we have son-in-laws, we have daughters, and we have grandkids that are here too. So we feel very fortunate to have generational participation in this. Jim and Mike, I'm going to let you tell the story, please.
Want me to start?
Yes, because I don't know what the story is.
Well, to be honest about it, our dad passed away in 2015, and he was the expert on all things history of the farm. So we had to do a little research, I think, to even come up with some of the things that we weren't aware of before. We're 5 years difference in age, so our experiences are probably a little bit different. The conversations we had with our dad and our grandfather are probably a little bit different. I guess I'll just start and give you a little history of how it occurred. In 1818, over in Ohio, Elijah Billingsley was born. And in 43, he and his wife and his mother-in-law moved from Ohio to Round Prairie Township in Jefferson County. So to be in your mid-20s and take on a move like that seems pretty adventuresome to us today, I think. But that's what they did back then, I guess. So I wasn't even, I had to stop and do a little research to find out what generation we were. So we're the 5th generation removed from when they settled. So Elijah was the 1st generation. He moved here and homesteaded on some area, took up some land, 40, 80, and then I think 120 acres. And in 1852, his son Samuel was born, who was a 2nd generation. And they had 10 children, including our grandfather. Mm-hmm. Samuel was, I think, 44 when our grandfather was born. When our grandfather was born, his oldest brother was 20. So they were spread out over quite a distance. Any more to that?
Well, back to the Samuel and Elijah business. That Samuel, his middle name was Elijah, wasn't it? I think they flip-flop the names every generation.
I don't know.
And our grandfather's name was Elijah Samuel, but he didn't like Elijah, and we never ever heard that name.
No, it's Charles in everything you read. Samuel Charles was our grandfather.
Okay.
So he may have
changed something.
He may have changed that at some point to something that he liked better. I don't know. But anyway, he was Sam C to us. So he was born in 1896, and of course, his brothers were from, 20 years earlier than that, some of them. They lost one in childhood, I guess. But around 1900, 4 of his brothers and one of his sisters moved to Ohio and homesteaded. So we don't have very many relatives in this part of the country. They moved to Glasgow, Montana, and homesteaded. One of the 4 brothers did return to Iowa, but the other 3 stayed out there, and there are far more Billingsleys out there today than there are here. We don't know any of those folks, but that's where most of the Billingsleys are today. So Grandpa, was being the youngest son, was left here, and he took up the farming operation. And I think when he was 36, his dad passed away. So he was pretty responsible at a fairly young age for carrying that tradition forward. Mm-hmm. Our dad was born in 1925. That was Don. He was the 4th generation. And his brother died in the Battle of the Bulge in 1945 in March, just before the war ended, unfortunately. So he was left to basically take over farming if that's what he chose to do, and I guess he chose to do that. So it wasn't easy, and I think I would have to say he worked harder physically than anybody I know of. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Nothing stopped him. He could get injured and he just kept going.
Had a real high threshold of pain. And when we were kids, even when we were kids, I was born in 1950. Well, there have been a lot of changes in the few years since then. They were one of the last families, I think, in the county to have a tractor. They didn't have a tractor until 1947. They farmed exclusively with horses. And in fact, I think when I was born, even though I don't remember it, I think they still had horses and used them to pull up hay into the hay mow and maybe some things like that.
I don't know if it's right, but I always heard that Dad sold the last team of horses the summer I was born.
That may well be. I was only 5. I don't remember. But he shoveled grain off the wagons until, probably the mid-60s. Probably till 1960 anyway. He shoveled grain off the wagons. Unbelievable.
I have nothing to add. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a couple of things that you wouldn't know or remember. So I remember the last time they used a threshing machine. I was very small, so it's kind of a blur to me. But I remember the last time they used a threshing machine with the oats, and that would have been the last time they had a group of guys in there for a meal at noon during threshing, and it was kind of interesting. They had an old shed that some hogs stayed in, a hog house, I guess you would call it, that was made with a frame, and then when the threshing machine was there, all the wheat and all the chaff from the oats and the stems and what have you was blown out over the top of this, and the whole structure of it, aside from the framework, was made from the threshing. And it had been that way for years, and it had built up to be a very thick padding of roof on top of that building.
Good insulation.
So, it was kind of unusual, I would have to say. So, they were fairly slow to adopt some of these things, partly because my grandfather was pretty frugal. Some people might use a different term, but he was pretty frugal, but it worked out for him all right, I guess. Hay, when we were kids, we thought in summer that's all we did the whole summer. I think that's a safe assessment, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty safe.
Because he had, when I was young, there were sheep, there were pigs, there were cattle, there were milk cows, there were chickens,
Mm-hmm.
So all we did was put up hay. It seemed like we started as soon as we got out of school, and we stopped in time to go back to school in the fall.
Dad had a Alice Jumper round baler, so he'd drop the bales in the field, and then we'd have to start collecting them. I remember the day I walked in the kitchen for lunch, and I said, we're starting to put up hay tomorrow. There's 15,000 bales laying in the field.
15,000?
Yeah. Wow. And it was just the two of us doing it that year.
No wonder you have strong backs.
I used to say I was one of the stronger skinny guys in the county. But I think I started working with my grandfather in the hay mow when I was about maybe 10 or 11, and he was like 65. So, did that 5 or so years till this guy got big enough to drag him along too. So then Grandpa quit. He was getting kind of tired.
Yeah, I don't remember Grandpa ever being in the hay mow with us.
He was with me when I started, and he was very meticulous about how we were going to position that hay. So he taught me, and I had to do it right. But it was interesting. It was fun to work with him. But he was fairly old at that time.
And then, of course, I started helping him, and it never got done right again.
But it was a lot of work, and that's basically what we spent our summers on.
One of the notes that I have here is regarding your mom, Lois. An interesting connection. One of our founding fathers here, William Henry Coop. Can you shed a little bit more light on that story?
I believe the gentleman that sits on the bench in the park, the statue, is the great uncle of our grandfather.
That's the way I understood it.
Okay.
Again, who knows how many generations are in there? I certainly don't.
Well, I think he's the great uncle. As I track it down, I think that's correct.
Well, that is so neat. And then also you talk about going to school, that 3 generations all went to the same Clay Hill School.
The school was just across the road from our driveway. And Grandpa and Dad and I all went there. It had closed before he started school, but lots of people think it was, like me and Abraham Lincoln, but, I'm not that old, but the country schools were unique in their own right. When I was in kindergarten, the next class was fourth grade. There was a big void in there.
And so this was all in a one-room schoolhouse then?
One-room schoolhouse.
So my recollection is we have learned there used to be one like every 2 miles so that people could ride the horse, could take the buggy, and be able to get back and forth to school. So you were just right across the road from it.
Ours was very close, so that was good fortune, I guess, for us. But it was just like the ones you go to at a museum or on display at the fair or any place where they have one. That's the way it was. And when it was really, really cold in the winter, just like the wagon train, we circled all the desks. There's a little pot stove over in one corner, and we circled all the desks around the stove in a circle. Mm-hmm. And there were odd things went on in the schools at that time. I remember one of our neighbor boys, who was older than me, came to school, and he had this little mold, and he brought lead. And when he didn't have anything to do, he could put lead in there and use the stove during the winter and mold bullets.
The stove would get that warm and melt the lead.
Apparently so.
Oh my!
I don't remember. Maybe he had to stick it inside the stove. I don't know how it worked. But I wasn't very old, and it was just a revelation to me that he was doing something like that.
So you were the last one, and then Mike, what school did you go to for your elementary then?
I went to Lockridge.
Okay.
And that was the same school where my dad had gone to high school.
Uh-huh.
So when I was in college, I used to tell my friends that, yeah, I went to grade school where my dad went to high school, and we still use the same books. Of course, nobody believed that.
It was
Great.
It was a progression. The schools closed down fairly quickly and disappeared.
Well, I'm trying to remember the details. I've been learning about this, that farmers on those every 2 miles were required to give up some space, and then when the schools were closed, and the farmers take over that land that was their property?
Not in the case with the school at the end of our driveway. That land stayed separate for a long time. I think they may have finally given it to the farmer that owned it, but It wasn't until not many years ago that it actually got plowed into the field. Mm-hmm. And do you remember any others that were like 2 miles away? There was the one in Glasgow.
Well, there was one south of the Round Prairie Baptist Church on the east side of the gravel road.
Okay, I don't remember that one.
It would have probably fallen within that range. And then if you went 2 miles east, you crossed into Henry County, and there was one called Rabbit Roost was the name of it.
Okay, I remember that one.
So they all had, kind of unusual generic names to go with their formal names.
Mm-hmm. Back in that day, I'm sure there was a Jefferson County Hospital, but did your doctor make house calls? Did they come to your property if you had a cold or you were ill? Or what happened as far as medical assistance for your family?
Not for us, they didn't. We went to town, but I think...
Dad was born in the house.
And I think the doctor came from Glasgow when he was born.
I don't know what he
maybe.
had for a doctor.
Glasgow used to have a small number of businesses and whatnot, and I think there might have been a local doctor there.
Okay.
But don't know the facts of that for sure.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to reach out and say, because you were in the eastern part of Jefferson County, Lockridge was your closest of the communities there, and just how did you get some of these services on that?
The roads were not very good in those days, obviously, and whether you were able to go or not go was kind of dependent upon the weather and the time of year. So it was borderline.
Now, with such an age spread, like you said, your grandfather 20 years before the others, would you have family reunions in the summer, 4th of July, any kind of get-togethers where other folks would come?
Not really.
I remember a few times when one or more of his brothers would show up from Montana. I think never more than one at a time, though. And but that was not anything planned, and actually they normally didn't even call ahead. They just showed up. So
we're here. Where's the food?
They were free spirits.
Yeah, there's the one called my grandparents saying he was going to fly into Ottumwa, and they drove to Ottumwa, and then he called up Mom and Dad and said, "No, make that Des Moines." So we drove to a town and sent Grandpa and Grandma home, and we went on to Des Moines and picked him up. And as I understand it, again, this is one of those things I'm not totally sure is right, but as I understand it, one time he showed up in a taxi from Des Moines.
Yeah, I think that's true. They looked out the window and he was standing out in the middle of the barn lot. They were free spirits.
I guess. Besides corn and beans and hay, I remember you saying hay, did you have cattle? Did you have beef or pigs or anything?
We had, when I was little, we had milk cows, not a lot, 6 or 8?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And Dad, I don't think, from what Mom always said, he really didn't like the milk cows. And so at some point he transitioned from those to beef cattle.
Okay.
I don't think Grandpa was willing to accept the change, really, but Dad started the transition and ended up growing a decent herd of beef cattle. Mm-hmm. But we still had the milk cattle one, too. When Grandpa got quite old, anyway.
So it was always my job, and I just found out reading some notes from my mother. It was my dad's job, I guess, when he was young, too, but it was always my job. The pasture for the cows was like a quarter-mile south of the buildings, and it was always my job to go around them up and bring them in. And typically they were pretty good, but every so many weeks they would get a little cantankerous, and you'd have trouble. They'd stop, they'd start. And so the next day I would take my BB gun along and stand a little distance away, but, peck them with a BB gun, and that would get their attention. And then they'd be pretty good for another few weeks. I don't know if he ever knew that it did that.
But it got their attention.
It got their attention.
Good. Okay, so you had some of those with the corn and the soybeans. Like you said, tractors weren't prevalent until later on. So, but to this date, is still primarily beans and corn.
Yeah.
Sometime in there, Dad quit raising the oats.
When the horses went away, probably.
No, he still raised them another few years after that because I used to drive the auger box to pick up the oats.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know when. I'm going to guess probably around 65 or so he quit doing oats. And actually, he didn't do beans early. He started the beans a little later too. So about the time he quit oats, he replaced them with beans, I think.
He quit the sheep when there started to be a lot of coyotes around, and the sheep were in a pasture that was a mile from the house, and the coyotes got to be a problem, started killing sheep, so that's when the sheep pretty much went away. It was after that. But
if he'd have known that would get him out of the sheep, he might have gotten coyotes earlier.
Imported some, brought them across the line, huh? Good.
That had to be after 2000, or after 1966, because I remember when I was 16 years old, he had a load of lambs that needed to go to market and to the sale barn in Keosauqua, and he had a little stock truck. And when I was 16, I just got my license. He sent me off with a load of sheep to take to Keosauqua. I guess Grandpa rode along with me for moral support, but I'd be surprised that anybody would do that today. He didn't seem to have any qualms about it.
Presuming that laundry was done once a week, and what was the process for wringer, whatever? Tell me how did your clothes get clean?
Wringer washer. Our mother worked at Dexter for 2 or 3 years after she graduated from high school before she got married, and as part of that, when she left, and I guess she knew she was getting married, she bought a wringer washer when she left, and that's what was always used up until.
Yeah, I don't remember when. By the time I was in high school, she had a more modern machine, but I don't remember the exact transition from the old one too.
And so in the wintertime, would she hang the clothes out, or would there be a place in the house where she could hang?
In the summertime, she always hung them out. In the winter, it probably varied back and forth because there was a room in the basement where she hung them now and then, but I think if the weather wasn't too bad, they went out.
Same thing happened in Ohio. There was a wringer washer that I got my hand in one time, and she did say this is what the button is you hit, and got it released from there. But I remember going downstairs, and here's all these clothes hanging in the basement and stuff. But when the weather was good, that's where it was, nice and fresh.
In the middle of the basement was a monster huge wood-burning stove when we were young. And every fall, Dad would open the basement window on that side, and there was a room that was probably 10 by 12 foot.
Probably.
And he'd basically fill that room with wood. And then we'd go down there and turn it into other layouts.
The other thing that happened in the basement during the time when they milked cows, our grandparents lived about 50 feet from us. There were two houses, a big house and a little house. And my grandmother was in charge of this separator that separated the cream from the whole milk from the milking. And so every evening after milking, while she was down there running the separator, and she did the process and then the cleaning, which was worse than the operating it, I think. And then a couple times a week, the cream man came.
Was that often? I was guessing once a week.
I thought it was a couple times a
It
week.
might have been, I don't know.
But he'd pick up the cream can with whatever they had collected since the last time, and also eggs, I believe, because, they sold eggs also.
They'd have this huge box, and I don't know, maybe 24 eggs per side, so 48 eggs per layer, and I have no idea how many layers they went into that box, but it's pretty good size.
I don't remember the box, but it was...
And so those eggs would be for your consumption, but then you would sell them also. And would you go to Lockridge, or where would people come to you? Or
I just went with the cream man, and he was the middleman, and I don't know if he sold them to the local groceries here in town, or don't know where they went to. All we know is they went away.
Primary, you produce it, and he'd haul it away and pay you for the materials that he would take.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Did you get much involved with construction? Did you do barn raisings? Did you have sheds? Did you have other things that you learned how to do a hammer and nail on?
Basically, the barns were old by the time either one of us were born. The north barn is like 130 or 40 years old now, I think. The south barn is quite a bit younger than that, but still old by the time we were born. And Dad built a couple of sheds during the time, but most everything was already there when we got.
The north barn's kind of a work of art to me, because it's one built with the beams and the wood peg construction.
Oh, really?
Oh, to me, that's really interesting.
And the beams are hewn by an adze. And when I was a kid, we still had the adze in the garage. I haven't seen it for the last 20 years, but I'm probably still there.
And they still stand. They were built well. And
that barn has on at least its third set of siding.
He took good care of the buildings that he wanted to protect, the barns. Some other old buildings, not so much, but the barns, he was pretty protective of them.
Well, they were where you would do your storage and other things. Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that. Reflecting back, either stories that were told to you or during your time, were there any tragedies in the area, people that were caught in tractors or fires, or any tragedies that you recall during your youth and growing up?
Well, I was probably about 5 when Velma was killed. Or not Velma, the first wife.
June,
yeah. The next door neighbor's wife was driving a tractor and rolled it into a ditch and was...
Well, she was pulling a disc, I thought.
No, I didn't say that. I just said she rolled it into a ditch, as I remember. Maybe she rolled it in the field. I don't know. But anyway, she was killed.
It ran over her.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so things did happen at that time.
Probably more interesting, or at least I find it kind of humorous, is the Lockridge Fire Department. They always had about a 50-year-old truck and about 6, 70 or 80-year-old guys. And if there was a fire, they weren't real effective. And I ended up in one burning house. Seems like it might have been 2 burning houses, but at least 1 burning house, and emptying Roy's hay mow out of silage because it heated. Well, the guys in the fire truck kind of sat there and looked on.
You took care of it. Oh, golly. Oh, good.
It was like being a long ways from civilization when it came to some things like that.
Sunday, was there a special time for church every week, or did you have a close-by church that you could attend?
Glasgow had a Methodist church, and it wasn't the original church. I think either number one or number 2 of these generations helped build the first church, and then I think the one that stood when we were kids was a replacement for the first one, maybe. But anyway, that was the local church for our family. There's also a Baptist church close by too, but the Methodist church was the one that our family always belonged to.
Mm-hmm. When you weren't putting up hay or doing other things, did you have time for recreation, fishing, horse races, county fairs, other things that were fun for you to do other than the normal day's work and labor?
Did you hear any fun?
I had a little problem with liking to read. And I know Dad got really frustrated with having to always come find me and get me off my book.
You know, we didn't, I don't think we had a lot of recreation. Mom and Dad had two weaknesses. They loved to dance and they loved to play cards. So they belonged to different clubs, card clubs, bridge, pitch, canasta, whatever. They loved it all. And they went to a lot of dances. You know, they were fortunate because our grandparents lived 50 feet away. So, you know, they had built-in caretakers for when they wanted to go do something. So they were able to do a lot of things. And when we were probably teenagers, they got involved in the Western style dancing, and they were gone all the time then.
Mm-hmm. As you said, most of your family migrated on west. If you did go to visit somebody, truck, a car, what was your transportation as you folks were growing up?
Our grandparents, because it was his grandpa's brothers that were out there, well, they went relatively frequently, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So they went and they always drove when they went, and when they would come home, they would. I don't know, you might have been too young for this, or maybe it was before you were. When they came home, because in Montana back in the 50s, people still carried silver dollars. They would always come home and bring me 2 or 3 silver dollars.
Okay, I remember maybe one time getting those.
I had the advantage. I was born first. But they would always bring silver dollars. And I think Mom and Dad went a couple times. We neither one had ever been to Montana at that point.
No. But as for transportation, Grandpa and Grandma had a car, Mom and Dad had a car.
Okay.
And then we always had a truck of some sort on the farm.
Grandpa and Grandma went for about a month every winter for a number of years to California to visit their daughter. And they started out going on the train. Of course, now keep in mind, Grandpa grew up with the horses and they didn't even have cars. But they started out going on the train. They did that for a few years. Then airfare got to be a lot more common, so then they switched to airfare, and I think he thought the flying was the best thing he'd ever done. I love that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Communication. You had postal service that would deliver to your house, so writing letters. And at your age, they probably already passed the crank phones. They'd gone on, or did you still have one?
There's 2 longs and a short.
Well, tell us more. Tell us more.
Well, the crank phones had a battery in the phone. They're the wooden ones you see mounted on walls. And the lady that ran the switchboard was in Glasgow, and she had the little peg things you plugged into the board. And everybody on your line had a different ring, and ours was 2 longs and a short. And I don't know, Grandma was next door. I don't know what hers would have been.
Yeah, I don't remember the ring, but I remember.
What I remember is every time the phone would ring, you had to listen to decipher what that combination was. And Mom always thought we were talking at the time it rang, so she was never sure whether it was her phone or not.
They got the dial phone a week before I started kindergarten.
Okay.
Well, and I think all the local people were part of an association, and the farmers, I think, helped put up the wires, and if a wire came down, I think they had to go repair it too.
All I remember is Dad taking down the wires when they went to the more modern phones.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up, like I said, in Cleveland, and you were on a party line with another family, and same type of a thing, and you'd hear it ringing, and you pick it up, and know it's for the other people. Or if you wanted to dial them, you had to do a special. We've come a long way with these cell phones now, folks. Definitely.
It's a little more private than being on a party line.
Yep. Through your lives, there was electricity. Do your folks ever talk about when electricity first came to the farm?
I think it was around 1947. I think it was after the war.
Okay.
But the house was built with a second set of pipes in the ceiling. And there is a second cistern out beside the house where at one time they'd toss in chunks of carbon and then pour in water and create a carbon gas so they could run gas lights in the ceilings of the rooms.
Whoa.
Sounds pretty frightening.
I have, thank you. I had never, that's something new for me. They were ahead of their time.
Carbide lighting, is that what they call that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. But pipe stuck out of the top of a wall when we were kids, and it was just a derelict pipe left there from those times.
Wow. Terrific. When you would go to school, and then when you would go to Lockridge School, did they still have chalkboards on there that you'd have to get up and write up some information for your lessons?
They definitely still had chalkboards.
From time to time.
Well, and then they went from blackboards to green boards, I think, in the progression, because you could see better. I don't know, maybe it wasn't as tough on the kids' eyes, but anyway, it was something that is definitely needed.
The big event at the single room school that I recall for the 3 years I went there, about Christmas every year, they put on a program for all the families around and kids, and they had a bunch of stuff stored, curtains and wire, and there were hooks on each side, and you strung a wire clear across. There was a stage at the front, a little shallow stage. Strung wire clear across, and then there was 2 dividers. The center stage was open, and then you had a divider on each side. It was kind of a dressing area, a prep area. And everybody would come, and they put out a lot of chairs, and they would have a Christmas program. And the teacher would work for, I feel like, weeks ahead of time trying to teach people songs and various things, and put together little skits and whatnot for that Christmas program. It was a big deal in the community to have the Christmas program. But
I'm getting some smiles over here from a retired teacher. Sandy Gillespie is on our board, and I think do you have anything that you want to share about Christmas programs? Okay.
there was no music teacher. It was just the one teacher did it all. So.
You mentioned the cattle. Did you have horses or ponies or things that you could ride for transportation or just around the farm at all?
I had a bicycle.
Bicycle? Okay.
Did you ever ride a horse?
They borrowed that one summer. I rode it once or twice, but it wasn't very cooperative.
I'm not sure I've ever ridden a horse.
Okay.
Dad absolutely loved horses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once summer we were a little older. He had bought a small horse, and he rode it around some. In fact, he got on a bareback and rode it out across the field chasing cattle, and he was probably 40s, mid-40s anyway.
I'm going to guess older than that. But
Maybe, I don't know, but he loved horses.
Still a kid and enjoyed it.
Yeah, but we never rode the horses.
Yeah.
We were more, as he says, bicyclists.
Mm-hmm.
If you could look in the rearview mirror and make the past come alive, what would be 1 or 2 things from each of you that you wish you could do again, or you wish you could share with your kids and grandkids and other things that you experienced on your farm?
I just don't know.
Well, the one thing that our daughter Laura and our other daughter Kristen got to do that they enjoyed the most, and I think we all enjoyed, was cattle drives. So the cattle had to be moved from one pasture to another. One place was a mile, the other place was like 2 miles. But and we did it with sheep before the cattle, but the cattle drive, moving the cattle, was always kind of exciting, and I think everybody thought that was a lot of fun, and it was fun that we got to share it with our daughters, and it'd been nice to be able to share it with the granddaughter too. But that was always enjoyable. Beyond that, I guess I can't think of a lot of any other activity.
Nothing's coming to my mind.
Good. The progress that we have seen in Jefferson County over the years has been remarkable. I've only been here since 1965, and thinking of all the gravel roads that we used to have that are now asphalt, and you reflect back on how many mud roads there were. And
I believe there's still a mud road going along one side of the pasture ground. So,
and then to have the gravel come in and later on that. So anyway, we have good family here. Are there questions or reflections or things that you would like to ask these guys up here? Please.
Who taught you the songs for musical plays?
So
The question, so you can do it. Please repeat what the question is.
So Francie wants to know who taught us the songs for the plays that we did at school.
Right. I'm wondering if they had music teachers there.
We did not have a music teacher. Some of the teachers could play piano, some couldn't. And I think if they couldn't play the piano, I think they might have gotten somebody from the community to come in and play the piano. But the teacher taught the songs, taught the skits and the plays and everything we did. The teacher did it all by herself.
Any other questions or comments from the family over here? Kathy, did you have something?
I was wondering about the school, the one-room school you said that you attended. What was the name again?
What was the name of the one-room school you attended?
Well, the generic name was Clay Hill. I think it was Round Prairie number 5, I think was the correct formal name. I think that's correct.
I've heard of, I think it's maybe number 2 or 6 that was Crackerneck School from Lockridge. You heard of that one?
No.
One of the Deers went to that one. And
That would have been north
that
of
would have been north.
north, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, you've added to my repertoire.
You had a question?
When you were talking about cattle drives, I was thinking of Yellowstone and all of the, the TV series with the horses and the helicopters and stuff. If you didn't have horses?
They are talking hundreds of cattle. We're talking 20.
Well,
50.
50, okay.
Walk along with the switch or?
So we substituted the helicopters for one pickup.
Somebody
And
drove
maybe-
ahead and somebody drove behind,
Yeah, a pickup and a car.
and the rest of us ran alongside in the ditches and the fields.
You normally had the pickup in front with some feed in the back of it because the cattle are a lot more interested in following feed.
Oh, that's cool.
But you always made a pass ahead of time to check for open gates, and people that had gates open to their fields, if possible, you would close those ahead of time.
When I was little, I was raised on a farm in northern Iowa. And one of the most fun things I did before school and as a youngster was just to walk the cattle paths, out in the fields and just kind of just walk and enjoy being out there and seeing what I saw,
Mm-hmm.
And I was, that wasn't dangerous. It's pretty safe.
Yeah.
And-
We lived on the start of the school bus route,
Okay.
and the school bus route was rather long.
Uh-huh.
So we were typically on before the sun came up.
Oh, wow.
And home after the sun went down. I mean, in the wintertime,
Yes.
in the shorter time.
Yeah.
We never saw the daylight.
And so we didn't do much walking or anything before getting on the school bus.
Oh, well, this was before, no, I didn't mean before the school day started.
Oh.
It was like preschool, like I was
Oh.
maybe 3, 4 years old and I would be walking the pastures, and out in
Mm-hmm.
the fields, and I knew where not to step.
Mm-hmm. Well, we both got that in going to get the milk cows in the evening.
Sure.
So you were on the school bus for like 45 minutes or an hour?
45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on
Yeah,
the year.
usually got on, but like you said, before 7, and got to school about 8:30. I mean, it was an hour and 15 minutes at least, and
Actually, he went his first few years to the end of Lane, and then he went to Glasgow couple years after that. So he had a little break that way, but I was fairly lucky because Mom was a secretary at Lockridge School. So I'd ride to school in the morning with her, and I'd only have to ride the school bus on the way home in the evening.
Did you have jobs as students in the school, especially like the one-room school? You had been young, but did the students have jobs within that school, like to heat the building or to bring in water or?
I think the teacher would ask the older boys to go out and bring in a bucket of coal or something, but it wasn't a formal process.
Right, yeah,
But they would help out a little bit when needed.
good.
We have another question here.
What kind of animals did you have on the farm?
What kind of animals did you have on the farm?
We had sheep, cows, pigs, chickens.
And that's all the things on the farm. That's all the things that you heard of.
And one by one, they kind of disappeared. except for the cows.
Why?
As Grandpa got older, he didn't want to do all the work that went with all the other animals, I don't think.
Did the chickens ever lay any eggs or get chickens?
We always bought chicken, baby chickens. Never raised our own chicken. Now, I think they did raise their own chickens before us, in early years. But, in our time, they always went to town and came home with a box about this big, about this tall, with a lot of little dinky holes in it, and it'd be full of baby chicks, little yellow baby chicks. And a couple days ahead of that, there was a building called the brooder house that the baby chicks went into. And they'd take kerosene and clean it with kerosene. I'm not sure, I guess that was disinfectant. And then they would always line the square corners with cardboard to make them round, because otherwise, if the baby chicks got frightened, they would trample each other and smother themselves in the corner. But if you had a round corner, well, then they wouldn't smother themselves.
Did any other animals ever have any children?
No, all the others
All
did.
the others did.
There was roughly 100 sheep in the flock when I was young. And of course, they all had lambs, but I remember being about the height of a sheep. And in the middle of these 100 ewes, and I was not fighting at all, they're gentle, but it's like you're caught in this mass of fuzziness.
Did you have a sheep shearer in the spring?
Yes.
Sheep shearer, yeah.
That's a fun process.
It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, I think, to be a sheep shearer.
Luckily, we didn't have to do it. All we had to do was move the wool after it was sheared.
And if you handle wool for a day or two, your hands are very soft.
Yes.
Because of all the lanolin, I guess that is, it's in wool.
Have you ever used for wool?
It went into a bag that was about 8 feet tall, would be my estimation. Wool bags were a long, narrow bag, and you filled them all the way full, and then you hauled them away and sold them.
So you sold it?
If not, I'm going to say thank you both for taking your time, for bringing your family with you today, and sharing all the way from, where's my note? 176 years, 1846. That's right up at the top of the ones that we've interviewed so far. So you're in the top 2%.
It's a long time. Isn't it?
It is a long time. So, well, congratulations to you. Thank you so much, and we will move on so you can take a closer look at what you folks have shared and Sandy's put together for you, and then you're invited to stay and look at the rest of the museum on your time here too.
Thank you, Dave.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mike.